Welcome to another Book Review Wednesday, and today I thought it would be interesting to dive into a short story, and this short story is called Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? By Joyce Carol Oates. This was actually a book that was required of me to read for college, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of discuss this one in particular, considering that I haven't really touched upon short stories and focused on that kind of writing. So, without further ado, this book basically talks about a teenager named Connie who is one of those teenagers who likes to daydream and again, like pretty much any teenager, they don't want to take responsibility for things, and they would just rather have fun and not have any obligations. And this puts her in sort of a strife with her mom, and also makes her sort of an outcast to the family, since June, her sister, is kind of the more goal-oriented sister and is also relatively older, so they almost have a natural bias for her because she is more mature. This, I think, ultimately is what kind of further enhances Connie's sort of rebellion and her combative relationship with her mom, and her rebellion oftentimes is kind of just seeking fun and pleasure and trying to pursue boys and all of that, and she ultimately gets unwarrantedly pursued by this guy named Arnold Friend, and he ends up being a real creep and sort of stalks her aggressively. And although she is combative with him and doesn't, cave into his manipulation, there is this kind of a ambiguous ending as far as the plot is concerned, and I think this sort of works for a kind of short story like this, and I think a lot of short stories try to leave certain things open maybe to interpretation, only because you're not really telling a sort of three-act structure, sort of telling an introduction and kind of a kind of ambiguous sort of conclusion, and not really leaving too much in as far as details are concerned. So it's pretty straightforward in that sense, which I think ultimately works. And what's interesting, I think, too, is I think it succeeds as far as making the audience feel creeped out by just how kind of how much this character Arnold knows so much about Connie, because he kind of just displays that as the story goes on, that he's sort of been observing her and sort of her behavior. And also it's rather haunting because not only does it leave things open to your interpretation kind of at the end, it sort of is a very it's almost like there is kind of this this two-way street, and you don't really know what street it's really going to go to, because it doesn't ultimately give you that answer. So I think that's something that's also very interesting to note. And I think it has been relatively debated over the years as far as uh, what really the message is this particular um, short story is trying to say. I mean, I feel for the most part it's just trying to be a story um, about, how sometimes uh, teenage rebellion, um, and again, mind you, over excessive teenage rebellion, like this girl is really kind of, she is a little bit stuck up and spoiled. Um, but at the end of the day, you don't feel like something as horrible should have happened to her, but at the same time, that you will see that ends up happening to her within this short story. But at the same time, there's also a sense of um, understanding that sometimes when you put yourself out there and you make yourself vulnerable, then it's more likely that maybe bad things can happen to you. I think this is sort of highlighted too into how she ends up meeting Arnold, by sort of her rebellion and going out and, displaying herself, and pursuing boys that ultimately you attract the wrong kind of crowd. So I think that's really what this short, I think, really um, says as far as from a uh, as far as a narrative is concerned, and how it sort of displays things within the plot. You can sort of get the idea that that's the sort of direction it's certain things end up going, and you kind of see based on the characters, you know what leads them to that, and we definitely see that with Connie's character. So um at the end of the day, I don't think it's trying to hone in on a particular message, so much as just kind of just warning people about um the kinds of destruction that can happen uh when we distance ourselves, um, and constantly feel the need to rebel. So I think that's kind of what it's really discussing, and um, some people like to point out if there's really a woman message thrown in, and I don't really think there really. It doesn't seem to me, at least, that there's so much as that it's more just about a teenager who ends up in horrible circumstances, not necessarily by her own fault, but by, her kind of uh, perpetrating what ends up happening to her. Not necessarily, it's not like a cause and effect, it's so much as the way in which she presents herself is how she kind of ends up in these sorts of circumstances. Um, is sort of what I think the message was trying to get at, and I think that's why there's this whole uh, honed in message of rebellion. And I think you could apply this in various contexts too, like somebody who um, gets into the lifestyle of, of drugs or whatnot, and what that can ultimately entail, um, and doing it as an act of rebellion or something, that kind of thing. I think is also uh, something that you can draw from. And I think although this is really circumstantial to um, a creeper going after a pretty teenager, um, it ultimately serves, I think, a wider purpose in sort of addressing the fact that it's important to not try to distance yourself from your family and whatnot. But yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this book. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I would be more than happy to answer them. If you're interested in this kind of a storytelling, then this is one you probably can gravitate towards. Again, if you don't mind the fact that it is sort of simple in its construction, you can probably find some enjoyment out of it. But if you really like to have a fully fleshed out story, then this is definitely not going to sway you. This is a short story to its core. Yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say when it comes to this particular topic for this video. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video.